In the history of popular music, records are made to be broken, except for one so outrageous it has stood untouched for nearly half a century. For consecutive #1 hits on the U.S. Billboard Hot 100, not as a performer, not with one band, but as the songwriter or co-writer behind 4 different songs by 4 different artists, all in a row, and at the center of it all was Barry Gibb of the Bee Gees, a man with a falsetto sharp enough to cut glass and a melodic instinct that seemed almost supernatural, because by the late 1970s Barry wasn't just a pop star, he was a one-man hit factory, capable of walking into a studio with nothing but a vague idea and walking out with a future chart topper. And what made this run so astonishing wasn't just the success, but the speed, the range, and the cultural dominance. With Barry at one point writing or co-writing 5 of the top 10 songs in America at the same time, something that felt less like coincidence and more like total takeover. The story begins in 1977, after the Bee Gees had already lived one full musical life as Beatles-inspired balladeers in the 1960s before fading in the early 70s. Only to reinvent themselves again when disco began bubbling up from underground clubs, and with manager Robert Stigwood's encouragement, Barry leaned fully into adaptability, developing the falsetto that would define an era. First tested on Nights on Broadway, and by the time Saturday Night Fever entered production, Barry's songwriting was in overdrive, not just for the Bee Gees but for other artists in Stigwood's orbit, a decision that would change pop history. The streak officially ignited in early 1978 when Stayin Alive exploded alongside the film, its relentless pulse built from a looped drum track and lyrics inspired by survival in the urban grind, hitting #1 in February and becoming more than a song. It was a cultural detonation, but even as it ruled the charts, another Barry-written track was waiting in the wings, and by March, Andy Gibb's Love is Thicker Than Water, written during a family trip to Bermuda and pushed by Barry despite Andy's doubts, replaced Stayin Alive at #1, meaning Barry had just knocked himself off the top spot, something unheard of in the industry. Before anyone could catch their breath, Night Fever, dripping with falsetto, harmony, and disco perfection, surged up the charts and reclaimed the #1 position, making Barry the only songwriter in history to replace himself at #1 twice in a row, with critics crying saturation but radio unable to resist. And then came the final strike, a curveball ballad, If I Can't Have You, performed by Yvonne Elliman, adapted by Barry specifically for her voice after originally being recorded by the Bee Gees, and when it hit #1 in April 1978, it sealed the impossible. 4 consecutive Billboard Hot 100 chart toppers written or co-written by the same man, Stayin Alive, Love is Thicker Than Water, Night Fever, and If I Can't Have You, a record Billboard confirmed had never happened before and has never happened since. In the aftermath, Barry's dominance only grew more surreal, with 5 of the top 10 songs carrying his fingerprints at once. But with saturation came backlash, as anti-disco sentiment brewed and the Bee Gees became a lightning rod for criticism, while behind the scenes Barry was running on fumes, recording vocals late into the night, arranging strings by morning, living under a constant demand for perfection that slowly drained the joy from the process. When disco's fall came, symbolized by events like Disco Demolition Night in 1979, it was brutal, yet even as radio turned away, Barry's record remained untouched, because it was never really about disco, it was about melody, emotion, and timing, the same instincts that later produced hits like Woman in Love, Heartbreaker, and Islands in the Stream, though none ever matched the sheer dominance of that 1978 run, which now feels like a perfect storm of talent, timing, and creative fire, captured in a moment when radio could still crown a king and one songwriter could shape the entire pop landscape. Today, with fragmented audiences and streaming era charts, it's hard to imagine anyone ever matching it, and maybe that's the point, because some records aren't meant to be broken. They're meant to remind us what's possible when everything aligns, and Barry Gibb's 4 consecutive #1 hits remain untouched, unmatched, and unforgettable. So the real question is this: could anything like this ever happen again, or was it truly a once-in-a-lifetime moment we'll never see repeated?